In this video, we're going to take a look at how you can optimize your images before you upload them to your website. The reason why we're taking a look at this is because typically images that come out of your camera are way too large in terms of file size and dimensions to upload to your web page. If you upload these files, these large images, without reducing the size, compressing them, what will happen is that your web page may end up extremely slow to load. So when someone goes to the page, they'll end up waiting, 30 seconds, a minute or more. And no one really wants to sit down and wait for your web page to load all these very large images. Another way it can affect you is by not having your website show up in Google. So for SEO, this is one of the reasons why Google show certain sites in the search results, is because they're quick to load and they have good content basically. So you want to make sure that your images are as small as possible and make sure that you are reducing down the dimensions as well as the actual file size, so that your browser or the browser of the user doesn't have to do a lot of work to pull those images down, because each time someone goes to a web page, it's actually downloading all these files that are on your page, and that's how it's affecting you. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is just bring you across to my screen and show you a couple of examples here of how you can optimize your images. Now you have several options. If you have professional photo editing software, great, you can use those to optimize your images and export web versions of them. However, I'm guessing most of you do not have access to these types of softwares. So I have some options here that are free that you can actually use. A couple of these options are going to be on your computer already. If you're on a Mac, you have the Preview app, which is what I'm going to show you in just a moment, which you can use to actually reduce the file size and resize the images. As well as if you're on Windows, I believe Microsoft Paint can do this as well. So do look into that. And further to that, I'm going to show you a web application. In fact, I've got links that I'm going to drop below this video that will actually show you a few different ones that you can use, and you can read up a bit more in a post that I will be attaching alongside this video, or attaching to this video. So on my screen here, as you can see, I've got a folder open with two images. This image here is from a stock image website called Unsplash. And if we pull up the details, you can see here that we have the image dimensions here at 4200 by 2800 pixels. Now this is extremely large for a web page. If you think about web pages, typically a web page is not going to be more than about, say, 1000 pixels wide. You're not going to really have a much wider web page than this. So this is already like, 3 times more than we need it to be in terms of width. So that's one thing we're looking at here. We're looking at dimensions, and we're also looking at file size. Now this is 2.8 megabytes. This is quite a large image in terms of file size. We want to keep our images below 1 megabyte. Now this might be extreme on the low end, but really you want to aim for about 100 kilobytes, which is a fraction of a megabyte. In some cases, you might not want to necessarily keep it as low as that, depending on the image, because it compromises on quality a little bit. But think about it this way. If your image, if you can get away with having it at that low of a file size and it still looks okay on your website, then you should go with that, because the smaller the size, the less the browser has to deal with in terms of downloading. And say the person's internet speed is on a slower, they have a slower bandwidth. This helps them to download the images quickly, especially if you have multiple images on a page. The smaller the file size, the better for each one, because it all adds up at the end of the day. Now you have to play around with the file sizes, but like I said, as a general rule, keep them under 1 megabyte. It's going to be different for each person or for each image. So now to reduce this down, we have to use some sort of photo editing software. This is another one here, which is a screenshot that I took off my desktop. You can see that this is 2600 wide by 1400, and the actual file size is 7.1 megabytes, right? So this is even much larger. And if you notice the PNG extension here, this is a different file format. PNGs tend to be larger than JPEGs. That's one thing to bear in mind. So that's probably why you see such a big difference as well, even though the resolution of this one here is higher. Now, the reason why you would want to use a high resolution picture is if you're going to print the picture. In this case, we're not doing that. We're doing it for the web, so we don't need such a large dimension. So let's open this up in preview. All I have to do is double click, and it's the standard app that opens up images on a Mac. So we can see now we have the image opened up in preview, and we can do a number of things here in preview. So if we come across the tools here and come down to adjust size, we can basically straight away put in the width that we want here. So I'm going to say 1000 pixels wide, and it will calculate the size here. And if you have this padlock checked, which it is checked by default, what happens is that it keeps the image constrained to the actual aspect ratio or the dimensions that it should be. So straight away it's reducing it down to a certain amount here. You can see it says it's going to be 214 kilobytes, which is a far cry from the 2.8 megabytes it was before. We're going to say OK here. But what we want to do is go ahead and export. So you can see it is physically looking smaller there. We can go ahead and export the image. And in doing so, we're able to save it in a much smaller file size. So here on this bit down the bottom here, it gives you a quality slider and it gives you a resulting file size. So we want to bring that down. I think before it gave us an approximation, right? So I want to bring that down and let go and see what it looks like. So I want this to come in at, say, 100 or somewhere there. As long as we're under 1 meg, remember, we're good. But let's see how low we can get it, as close as possible to 100 without losing too much quality. Now we can't see what it's going to look like at this point, so we have no choice but to export it. So I'm quite happy with 133 kilobytes. So what I'll do is just go ahead and export it. But before I do so, I'll just click into the name here and add web. So we know that this is the web version. And if you remember, this was 2.8 megabytes before. So now that's exported, we can come across here and it's rounded it to 142, and the original one was 2.8. Now it did actually change the size here with the original one. It overwrote it. So when we actually did the resizing, it already overwrote it, but I've shown you how to export it as well. So you can see that it says 142. But remember, it was 2.8 before. So that's a significant difference. So that's how you would actually do resizing using the preview app inside the Mac. So if we look at the image, actually, if we pull this up now again, you can see that the quality is looking great. This is fine for a web page. So I'm going to show you another way by using this screenshot here. So if I go to my trusty incognito window here in Chrome, I have a website called imageresizer.com. This is a web app which is free for you to use, and as you can see, it's got some ads here, so be careful not to click on the ads. What you want to do is just use the tool, but obviously they use the ads to support the website. So what you got to do is either click and upload, or you can drag the image, which is what I'll do here. You'll drag the image, and if you remember, this is that one there, and it's about 7 megs large, and just give it some time to upload. Now you can do several things once it's uploaded here. You can actually crop the image by clicking the crop button here, and you can just drag around and crop the area that you want, or you can actually type in a specific width and height if you wish, and it will give you sort of like that shape there in terms of the dimensions. Let's say we wanted to use this portion of the image. I can go ahead and click this crop button to confirm that. And then down here, we have the actual dimensions of the final image, what we want it to be. So if you remember, we want it to be about 1,000. Again, that's my sort of guideline there. Sometimes I do 800 as well. It just depends. So once you've got the padlock clicked, once you've clicked the padlock here, which it's already selected, it will keep the aspect ratio that we already did from before. And we're dealing with pixels there, so we don't need to change anything. Now, this originally was a JPEG, was a PNG, and we want to export it as a JPEG. The only reason why you would use a PNG really is because let's say you have a background which is transparent. If you do JPEG, you won't get that transparency. You will end up with a white area where that background should be transparent. You don't want that if it's a transparent background. You want to keep it as PNG, but we don't have a transparent background going on here or any transparency. So we're just going to bring it across to JPEG or JPG. And I could put in here target file size to be like, so let's say 100, but I'm going to leave it to do its thing. I'm going to not do that. It says optional there as well. So let's see how much we can bring this image down by. I'm going to go ahead and say resize image now. And it's already done its thing. So we're coming from, it calculated the image size originally as 6.74 megabytes. And we now have it at 60 kilobytes, right? So we've basically gone under 100 kilobytes, and it's at 1,000 by 551 in terms of pixels. So what we need to do now is to download the image. So this is the download button for the image here. We're going to go ahead and click on that. And it's now downloaded it. So let's take a look. Now it downloaded to my downloads folder. So what I'm going to do is just drag it into here so we can compare the images. And we can see it's 61 kilobytes. And the original was a PNG. We have a JPEG up here, and we have the PNG original, which is 7.1 megabytes. It's calculated it at. And you can look at our dimensions here is 1,000 by 551. We can actually open up the image in preview, and we can see that we haven't lost much quality. Obviously, it's a smaller image, but again, we're doing this for a web page. So that's how you would do it in one of those web apps. Now, this particular web app, you can actually do bulk resizing as well. All you got to do is drag in multiple files into it. So I'll just show you how to quickly drag in the files, but it's pretty straightforward, the same process as before. I will just do these two here so you can actually see. And down here, it will show you a preview of the files that you've got lined up to upload. So we can say proceed with bulk resize, and it just takes a little while to upload both the files. You can see this one is still going because it's much larger, 6.74. And once it's completed uploading, we can then move on to the next screen where we can actually do the changes. So it's automatically taken us there. So here again, we can enter dimensions here. We can say we want them to be no more than 1,000 wide, and just leave it to do its thing there. And we can also put a constraint on the height if we wanted to. Down here, we have some options to optimize it. You can leave it at, let's say, good image quality. You just have to play around with it to see slightly different options here than if you were to do them individually. And then you can actually save it as a PNG or a JPEG here as well. Once you're done with them, then you basically say resize. But because you're doing bulk, it gives you slightly different options here. But that's pretty much how you can resize your images. So please, please, please make sure you do this before you upload them to your website, and it will save you a lot of headaches in terms of loading speeds on your pages, because this is the most common issue when it comes to slow website pages. That's all I've got for this one. If you need more information, check out the links in the description of the video, and I'll see you in the next one.